I'll see you again in 25 years.
Well, Josh, before we get to our discussion of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me,
yeah.
I'd like to point out to you and the audience, we are filming this episode on May 1st, and I just discovered, like an hour ago, the release date of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me was May 1st,
oh, serious?
1992.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's a very weird David Lynchian coincidence. So yeah, we're here to talk about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, David Lynch's 1992 film. Universally hated at the time it came out.
Surprisingly so, I think.
Yes, but, well, I don't know if it's so surprising, but we'll start by talking about the series. Lasted 2 seasons. Everybody loved the first season.
Mm-hmm. It was huge.
Huge. Twin Peaks was parodied on Saturday Night Live. I vividly remember that.
That's how I discovered the series.
That's me too. That was the first anything Twin Peaks related I saw was the sketch with like Mike Myers as the man from another place. And Conan O'Brien's in the background.
Oh God, that's right. Yeah.
I think he's Deputy Andy. He doesn't have any lines because he's just a writer on the show. But yeah, has there ever been a series that was that loved and then crashed and burned that quickly and that hard?
Boy, oh boy. I feel like there might have been.
Yeah, well, before we get into that, what did make it special? Like, because I think it's safe to say we both love Twin Peaks.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite shows. And you always have to have that little but, because then you have to talk about the second season.
Well,
that first season starts off so strong.
Yes. She's dead. Wrapped in plastic.
So it starts off with the big shock. The homecoming queen has been killed. Who killed Laura Palmer? Who killed Laura Palmer?
That's all anyone was talking about when the show came out.
Doesn't matter.
Yes, that's the thing. That was the jumping off point to introduce all these characters. And initially how they all deal with, how Laura Palmer's death affects all of them.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what gets you into the world of Twin Peaks and all these wonderful characters.
Yeah.
So these characters that are really well defined and really interesting and different for a TV show.
Fellas, don't drink that coffee. You'd never guess. There was a fish in the percolator.
Although in Twin Peaks, no one is really what they seem except maybe Andy. What Twin Peaks really did in terms of an ensemble cast is really try to be a lot of different things within a 1-hour weekly show.
Yes.
Cotton balls.
When I would do a rewatch with someone who had never seen it before and they would like kind of make faces about something like super goopy, like, you know, some sort of like swooning love thing and then the Badalamenti music would come, it's just like... Well, it's kind of supposed to be a soap opera parody.
Well, that's the thing I wanted to mention for people that maybe haven't watched Twin Peaks and are going to get into it. It's pretty far removed from that now, but the idea of like when the show was originally on, like primetime soap operas were a big thing. You had like Dallas or Knots Landing, and all those type of shows were really popular. And this was, I don't want to call it a parody, but there was definitely an aspect of the show that was kind of poking fun at that.
Yeah, and that was purposeful. They would always have the
Invitation
on TV,
to Love.
Exactly, where all the characters parallel all the characters in Twin Peaks.
Yes,
it's just like, hey, okay, we're doing a little bit of that.
So yeah, any of the kind of melodramatic stuff, like they know what they're doing. On the show.
Yeah, it dealt with all of the tone shifts so well.
Yeah.
Which is incredible for any show.
And it's one of the scariest fucking things ever, too, on top of that. On top of being very, very funny and dramatic, genuinely dramatic in parts, and being horrific. And that's one thing I will say is I don't think, as effective as Fire Walk with Me is, I don't think there's anything in it as terrifying as some of the moments from the show.
I would argue
for me,
a couple of spots.
Okay, well we'll get into that, I guess. But for me personally, there's some moments on that show that just can't be topped. And then David Lynch does the same thing again in Inland Empire with Laura Dern. Just keeps coming at you, and you get uncomfortable.
Yeah, just almost feeling like you're going to break straight through the TV and
exactly
come and get you next. Oh, that's not good. The first season was definitely breakthrough TV. Everybody was talking about it. It was definitely a unique thing. And then ABC pushed David Lynch and Mark Frost, the creators, to solve the mystery.
Yes, which was never the intention. We were never going to find out who killed Laura Palmer. It was just going to be this kind of running through line.
Yeah.
So early into the second season, so yeah, it's, you know, we get revealed who the killer is, and then almost immediately the show takes a pretty drastic nosedive.
Almost immediately, because they hadn't planned on it, didn't want to solve it,
right?
And they didn't know what the fuck to do.
And I think there's a common misconception that another part of it is, in the dip in quality, is that David Lynch left to work on Wild at Heart.
Right.
That seems to be the perception, but I think he was done with Wild at Heart at that point.
I think
so.
It's it was in between.
Yeah, but the movie was already shot and everything.
Yeah.
I think it was just more he was so kind of disheartened by, because that was, I mean, the show meant a lot to him, and then to like take away the entire kind of conceit of it.
Yeah.
I think he just sort of backed away for a while.
Yeah, which then led to all sorts of various sort of infighting, which actually affected Fire Walk with Me.
Yeah.
Where Mark Frost isn't there because they had a falling out. Like Cheryl and Fenn, you know, it's part scheduling conflicts, and part she's just like felt abandoned during that whole second season, which is really too bad, because there are a few pretty dicey episodes, although I maintain most of it's fine and still in character if you just took the James plot out.
That's, yes, my suggestion to anyone that hasn't watched Twin Peaks and is going to get into it, go in knowing that the second season is going to get very rough, and once James leaves the town, fast forward through any scene with him, because it's completely useless.
Yeah. And once he's gone, which is fantastic, at one point he just removes himself from the show. He's like, well, I'm going to California.
Even the writers are just like, we don't know what to do with him.
Yeah. And then immediately from there on, the show is working its way back up with that, and then the addition of Wyndham Earle.
Yes.
Which is fantastic.
Wyndham Earle is a fun character.
Yeah. And basically it allows Cooper to have a new direction,
right?
Because once
once the mystery solves, they didn't know what to do with him for a while.
Like, I don't know.
I guess I'll just stay in Twin Peaks because I like it here.
Yeah, and that's just left him rudderless until they were able to introduce a new nemesis for him, a very personal nemesis, as it turned out.
So great first season. First half of the second season is pretty great. Gets really, really bad. Works its way back up, and then the final episode is one of my favorite things that David Lynch has ever done.
Yeah.
And I'm still amazed that aired on network television.
Another friend.
I think people are kind of accustomed now to TV shows being very cinematic.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things like Fargo or like Game of Thrones that feels more cinematic than a lot of movies do.
Yes.
And so Twin Peaks was kind of the start of that. And there's still aspects of it that look like a TV show, of course, because it was made in the early 90s, but
it's definitely, they shot it on film. It definitely is lit, you know, in a film style.
Yeah, and just subject matter-wise, like the show, I mean, there's that sort of surface level where it's kind of quirky and there's funny elements, but I mean, it's a dark subject matter.
Absolutely.
Everything that happens with Laura Palmer, which of course goes into the movie too.
Yeah, because the Fire Walk with Me is a much darker tone, but it's all stuff that was in the original series. It was all there. It was just actually telling the story instead of alluding to it.
Yeah, it really, like, the last episode of the show, David Lynch comes back and he's like, you guys are fucking everything up.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take over and we're gonna right this ship. And so, like, in the middle of the second season, the Nadine character bumps her head and thinks she's a cheerleader or whatever. In the last episode, David Lynch just comes in, he's like, no! Correcting that. And basically tries to get the series kind of back to what it was originally supposed to be, like tonally and stylistically. But by that point, no one was watching the show anymore, so it was pretty much done with. And the end of the season left a lot of unanswered questions. So I think when people heard that he was going to make a movie, they probably were under the impression that he was going to continue that. And because he's David Lynch, he went the exact opposite route. Yeah. And I think one of the big themes of the movie, Fire Walk with Me, is just constantly subverting expectations.
Yes.
I mean, the opening shot of the movie is television getting smashed in with a sledgehammer.
In case you wondered how David Lynch felt about the whole experience.
Yeah, and that's not subtle imagery. That's not the first time David Lynch has done that either. Like, you look at the opening of Blue Velvet, where it's like picket fences and, you know, there's birds chirping and all this, and then the camera goes down under the surface and there's all these bugs. And it's like, this isn't subtle, but it's a good thesis statement for what the rest of the movie is going to be.
Yeah. But it is something that I feel like might have been a problem with the movie, is that it feels like sometimes you kind of have to have watched Twin Peaks, or at least have a working knowledge.
The overall story, I think works as its own movie, but there's so many of the details that resonate more if you're familiar with the mythology that the show is set up.
And this is just kind of the way I feel, because I've got no way of knowing, but I feel like if you hadn't seen Twin Peaks, things would just seem a little empty in certain places, or it's just like, why do these people care so much?
Well, that's the big question. Is I've heard people say, like, I'm going to get into Twin Peaks. Do I watch the show first, or do I watch the movie first? Because the movie is a prequel, so I should watch it first, right? Don't do that.
Oh, no.
The movie is a prequel, but in certain aspects, it's also a sequel.
Yeah.
Because in the weird world of Twin Peaks, time and space sort of transcends differently than they do on Earth. So
yeah. And not only that,
there are things in the movie that happen after the death of Laura Palmer, but certain characters show up. And
not only that, it's spoilers galore.
And there's that, too, yeah. Well, I think that might be some people's criticisms of the movie is, like, we know the backstory of Laura Palmer, so why do we need to see this?
Well, because we're seeing it through her perspective. To show her motivations throughout the movie, we have to rewatch and re-experience some of the stuff that we already know. And I think that's important to illustrate how just damaged she is, and how she doesn't have any idea what she's doing, and she's trying to do right and has no idea what right is anymore, maybe.
Well, before we get to Laura Palmer, we have a whole other storyline going on for the first half hour of this movie.
Which the first time I watched it, I dearly loved. I was like, this is, like, I'll watch that movie. This is so much fun.
Yeah, the movie opens on Bizarro World, Twin Peaks. Yeah. The town of Deer Meadow, where in Twin Peaks we got the Double R Diner, and it's this nice friendly diner with friendly waitresses, and in this movie we get this dumpy Haps, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
This dumpy diner with an old kind of rude waitress.
You want to hear about our specials? We don't have any.
But we get the police station, and
everybody's assholes.
Everybody's a dickhead.
Teresa Banks had a ring. Any idea what happened to it?
We got a phone here. It's got a little ring.
I do like that that's set up immediately, because even if you're not super familiar with David Lynch in film as opposed to in the TV show, they're confronted immediately with, the first thing that happens is Gordon Cole is yelling at the top of his lungs at Chet Desmond in the field.
Yes.
Okay, Gordon. Oregon!
And Chet Desmond, who's played by Chris Isaac, and does a fine job.
Oh, he's great in this,
He's wonderful. He's very, like Cooper without the coffee.
What time is it, Stanley?
The opening Deer Meadow stuff is very funny.
Very funny.
We get instead of the Great Northern, we get a shitty trailer park.
Run by Harry Dean Stanton.
Run by Harry Dean Stanton.
It just means more shit I gotta do now.
And yeah, eventually they start discovering some parallels with Laura Palmer, which we know. They don't know that, obviously.
Probable cause: repeated blows to the back of the head by a blunt, obtuse, angled object. I wonder where her ring is.
And Chet goes to look for something else, because Teresa Banks had a ring.
Yes, a ring that plays an important part in the rest of the movie.
Yes.
And I guess we'll get into it because I'm not sure I fully understand it.
I think I've got a good grasp on it now.
Okay, well, we'll get to that a little bit later, I guess. But he goes missing then. He reaches for the ring, and then it just sort of cuts.
And then he disappears from the movie.
Yeah.
that happens.
Thanks for stopping by the movie, Chris Isaac.
But that's when we cut to the FBI offices.
Gordon, it's 10:10 a.m. on February 16th. I was worried about today because of the dream I told you about.
And
he comes across very different than he does on the show.
Yeah.
The show, he's a little more chipper and upbeat, and he seems like distracted or concerned, and from the very beginning. And he's not even given I guess there's a deleted bit that kind of introduces him proper, where there's like almost a reveal, like, hey, it's Cooper, it's that character you love. In the movie, the final cut of the movie, it's just a wide shot, and he just kind of walks into the room.
Yep. Hey, Gordon.
Yeah, not making a big deal, no fanfare, no fan service, just, hey.
He's worried about something.
Yeah, and that's when David Bowie shows up. For a very, very, very awkward and truncated scene. I actually have a lot of problems with this scene.
Yeah.
Who do you think this is there?
Suffered some bumps in the old noggin, eh, Phil?
What the hell did he say there, Albert? That's Special Agent Dale Cooper. For God's sakes, Jeffries, where the hell have you been? You've been gone damn near 2 years.
And I noticed it even before I think I saw the movie, before I really knew about how much had been cut out of the movie. But even just watching it in the current form that it's in,
you can tell.
It feels like a highlight reel of a scene that was cut, to the point where it's like maybe you should have just taken this out completely.
Well, but it's important because it introduces the apartment over the convenience store.
In that case, leave the scene intact so it makes sense, because when we get to the deleted scenes, that whole sequence with David Bowie and showing the characters from some other place above a convenience store, it's great. It's a really great sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Jeffries, you've been gone damn near 2 years.
It was a dream. We live inside a dream.
David Bowie's awesome in it.
He's got a weird southern accent, kind of like Gary Oldman in The Fifth Element.
Yeah, that's true. And it's wonderful, and David Bowie's great in it, but it's truncated so much in the movie that it's actually frustrating.
The crossfades.
He's gone! He's gone! Albert, call the front desk!
I've got the front desk now. He was never here.
This is when we cut to the story proper. That first half hour, lots of interesting, weird, quirky David Lynch stuff.
Yeah.
It's very funny. And then the movie takes a pretty sharp turn after that.
And the angels wouldn't help you. Because they've all gone away.
I mean, it's very much a David Lynch movie, but it's definitely lacking his sense of humor that a lot of his stuff has.
Yeah.
It gets very dark.
Very dark.
It's actually, as far as I'm concerned, outside of maybe The Elephant Man, for me, it's like his most kind of emotionally resonant movie.
Yeah.
And it's very sad, and it's very dramatic in a way. Like, he gets accused a lot, David Lynch, of kind of like sensationalizing the violence in his movies, or like, I know Roger Ebert famously accused him of like exploiting his actresses.
Yeah.
But he asked Isabella Rossellini in this movie to be undressed and humiliated on the screen, as few actresses ever have been, certainly in non-porno roles.
He put this disease in me.
Like when Blue Velvet came out, and he's like, Isabella Rossellini's being exploited, and she's like, what are you talking about? I'm fine. But I think, and this is part of what I think really drove David Lynch to make the movie, is I think he kind of fell in love with the character of Laura Palmer.
For sure.
The show got off track, of course, and then I think this, to me, is sort of David Lynch trying to give a bit more dignity to that character.
Yeah, because in the show, I mean, uniformly, everybody loves her, no matter what terrible shit she's into.
Yeah.
You know, and she got into some awful things, but everybody loved her.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that kind of, maybe resonated with David Lynch. Just like, well, why did everybody love her?
Yeah.
And what was there?
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to tell that side of the story.
Well, and I think that adds to the movie too, is because obviously we know what happens. We know Laura Palmer is going to get killed.
Yep.
We know a lot of the backstory that the movie is sort of fleshing out. But what it does is adds more tension to everything in the movie because we do know where it's going. It makes everything so much more tragic. Like you just want to reach into the screen and like help her.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if I've ever been as affected by a character in a movie as by Laura Palmer.
Yeah. And I think a good chunk of that is Sheryl Lee's performance.
Yeah, I don't know why she didn't go on to have, she's fantastic in this movie, and she's fearless, and she might be the best screamer that's ever been in a movie.
Yeah. She's absolutely the, if you don't get anything else out of this movie, just watching her performance, she's able to telegraph some things that are just like some of the stuff that was the most terrifying for me.
Leland, what are you doing?
Look at this finger here.
Leland?
Laura did not wash her hands before dinner. Oh, look at this.
Don't.
Oh. Is it from a lover? Did you get this from your lover?
That evening at supper, Leland is being just that scene where he's got her by her cheek, and she's just like paralytic with terror.
Yes,
and she's just she gets it all out through the screen, and it's like you're there with her, and it's fucking terrifying.
Yeah, well, that's like I'd mentioned, David Lynch sometimes gets accused of sort of having sort of like an ironic detachment from his material or playing it a little kind of flippant, and there's none of that in this movie. It's completely stripped away, and it's just, I mean, the movie essentially, once you get past the first Deer Meadow stuff, the first half hour, which is all the quirky stuff, it's a pretty, I mean, there's ties to the show, and there's ties to the supernatural elements of the show, the mythology, but at its core, the movie is just sort of like an examination of this damaged person and how she is sort of dealing or not dealing with the effects of abuse.
Yeah.
And it's just so straightforward as far as those emotions go.
Yeah. She's on all sorts, tons of cocaine, is involved with all sorts of shady cut characters, involved with that, but still is trying to hold on to her best friend and her family.
Yeah. While also trying to not drag them down with her, which is a big part of the movie.
Yes. And the mood swings that she goes through involved with that were the whole scene where Donna decides to get brave and follow Laura out on her adventures and ends up in the pink room.
Accompanied by one of my favorite pieces of music of all time. Definitely one of my favorite pieces of music in a movie.
Yeah.
The track is just called The Pink Room.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful. I wish that was the soundtrack to my life. I wish I just walked around and whatever I was doing, that music was just playing. Well, I guess he always is really good with sound, but the sound in this movie specifically, a lot of the ambient noise, the rumbling, there's parts where the sound around is so loud you can barely hear people, and that sequence in particular is...
Yeah, the band is cranked up so high.
It's so loud that they have to subtitle the actors.
Yeah.
Which was confusing when I first saw this movie. It was on DVD, and they didn't have the sound mixed properly.
Oh.
So you could hear everybody, but it was still subtitled, and I was like, what is happening?
Yeah.
So on the Blu-ray, they've corrected that, and it's proper, where you can't make out what anybody's saying.
Mumble, mumble.
Yeah.
And I love that that's it's supposed to be such this different dimension in this room, and everything's, you get a sensory overwhelming kind of thing with that. The way that Laura is shifting her mood within that scene as well, where at the beginning of it, she doesn't really want Nana to come, but then kind of dares her to, and then, is basically pushing her to do these things and also pulling her away from it, just back and forth, and she can't figure out what to do, which eventually ends up Laura just pulls her away, and they leave, ultimately showing her this is what I do, don't do this. When she finds out that Bob is her father, it really kind of just jumpstarts everything that's wrong, and you kind of get how this is going to be the end from there. Because her secure home life, as it was, like she believed in her parents, and now it's just like gone.
Well, that's one thing I'll say. In the deleted scenes, there's a little bit more of her interactions with her parents early on, and I think those scenes would have helped the movie a bit.
You will never be a smoker if you don't start. I mean it.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, Laura. Where's my axe? I'm hungry!
And they're sort of playful, and then there's a dinner scene where they're all like laughing and having a good time.
Yeah, they get to be a real family.
They're a real family, and we don't really get that in the final cut of the movie.
Yeah.
Well, something that I think the movie, and it's been a while since I've watched the show, so maybe I'm misremembering it, but it seems like the show, it's very clear cut, like Leland Palmer is possessed by Bob, and Bob is doing these heinous things. It's very cut and dry. And the movie kind of, it's a little more, not ambiguous, but you definitely get a sense that there's some darkness to Leland himself outside of Bob. And even that dinner scene where he's like talking about how she needs to wash her fingernails. Like, is that Bob? Is that him? It's a little more gray than it is on the show, which I think makes Leland more interesting, because obviously what happens to Laura is pretty tragic, but even Leland himself, like, you can see him struggling with these darker aspects of his personality.
Yeah, and it's a question of how much of this, like, how long has Bob been there?
Yeah.
And you can read it if you don't, if you're not looking for those answers, you can read a lot of different ways, and it definitely isn't spelled out in the movie.
Yeah.
And some of it is, I've always kind of seen it as like Ray Wise does that thing where he just kind of changes his expression. It's just like, oh, that's Bob. Okay. He telegraphs a little more at certain times, but other times he doesn't.
Yeah. Well, we talked about how great Cheryl Lee is in the movie. We have to mention Ray Wise.
Yes.
Who's the second best thing in this movie.
Oh, man. Oh, I'll sit down. But not a one of us is going to start eating until Laura washes her hands. Wash your hands!
He's kind of the best thing in everything he's in, though.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to do anything. He just shows up in something, and you're like, hey, it's Ray Wise.
Yeah.
And he makes it all better.
He is good. But he also does a fantastic job just with a difficult role. Even just the bits and pieces where he's, where Mike, the one-armed man, is in the RV, comes screaming by, yelling at him, and he's got the ring on his finger.
Yeah. Well, that's another part where some of the sound effects are so loud you can barely, and he's like yelling, and you can barely hear him.
Can't really tell what's going on, but they're both just freaking out. But we get back to the ring there again.
Yes, explain the ring. Is the ring sort of meant to kind of protect Laura?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
what confuses me about that is earlier when Cooper's in the Red Room and he's saying, "Don't take the ring."
Don't take the ring, Laura. Don't take the ring.
I think it's because he doesn't understand necessarily what the ring is.
So he's like me.
Well, yeah, but he just being Cooper, he's just like, I don't have a good feeling about that.
There's supernatural shenanigans going on here.
Yeah.
Stay away from all this stuff.
Yeah, so don't do this. But it turns out it's kind of a protective thing, because we're getting to the very end. She has ditched James, run off into the woods to meet up with Jacques and Leo, and run at Pulaski. You have to kind of remember when you're watching this, all these girls are supposed to be like 16, 17 fucking years old.
Yes.
And you have to remember that. You have to keep that in mind, because it makes it even, it makes it worse, but it's important.
Yeah. Well, that's something in rewatching it I was thinking about early on is, there was the show, the TV show was a few years earlier, we're a few years later than that, and I'm sure when they shot the show, those actors were probably in their like early 20s or something.
Yeah.
And now we're a few years even more removed from that. So seeing Laura Palmer, seeing Cheryl Lee like walk down the halls of the high school, I was like, she's pushing it.
Yeah.
As far as looking like a high schooler.
That kind of breaks up when Leland shows up.
Well, this is, he's sort of struggling. He's kind of going back and forth between himself and turning into Bob.
Yeah. Yeah, so we know by this point that Bob wants to possess Laura.
Yeah.
And Leland shuts the door, but not before Mike can throw the ring in. and that protects her from being possessed.
Right.
So Bob can't get into her, so he gets mad and kills her instead. It definitely transcends. Like it's not like a Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer or something like that, where you're kind of wallowing in it.
No,
it's transcendent.
Yeah, it's very style. It's almost like operatic. You have, like you mentioned, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, where it's very sort of straightforward and brutal and almost like documentary style. And then you have this, which is definitely more stylized, but as far as like understanding the emotions of what's happening, I think it's way more resonant than something that would portray this type of story, or like a girl that's suffering from abuse in a more kind of traditional way, in a more, where it might become like kind of saccharine or preachy. Like this is just sort of like, the emotions feel real, even if we're not seeing it in a stark, realistic way. Yeah,
the general presentation, and this goes for the series as well, it's just kind of a bit of a magical reality thing. Like it's heightened.
Yeah.
But everything that comes through emotionally definitely escapes that or is separate from that, and you don't doubt any characters or what they're feeling.
Yeah.
Especially towards the end.
Well, I do think at this point Laura Palmer is very aware of what her fate is going to be. I almost feel like she's sort of like sacrificing herself in order to let Ronette Pulaski get away too.
Yeah.
I think that's an aspect of it. And I think in a way kind of protect everybody. Like that's this whole movie, is her sort of like trying to keep the people around her from kind of succumbing to the darker aspects of their personalities in the way that she has.
Yeah.
There's a scene earlier on when she runs into the log lady outside the bar.
When this kind of fire starts, it is very hard to put out. The tender boughs of innocence burn first, and the wind rises, and then all goodness is in jeopardy.
I kind of took, like, the implications of that are almost that, like, eventually this evil can everyone can succumb to this.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like a reflection of the Deer Meadow town at the beginning, where everyone's just like a miserable asshole.
Yeah.
So Twin Peaks, everybody's nice and you like these characters.
And
so like it's almost like Laura Palmer is sacrificing herself to make sure that the rest of the town is safe. She's like Donnie Darko.
Kinda, but she doesn't necessarily know what else is going on in that town behind her back anyway.
That's true, that's true.
There's a lot of shit happening.
There's a lot of shit going on behind the scenes in Twin Peaks.
Yeah. I do love that scene though, because why was the log lady hanging out at the Bang Bang bar? Just by herself, like, log lady, doing log lady stuff.
She's getting tired of the log, wants to meet someone new, who knows?
I don't know.
Meet a nice lumberjack?
Maybe, yeah. And then Laura ascends to the Black Lodge and Cooper comforts her.
Yes. Up until the new series was announced, to me it felt like a good conclusion to the Laura Palmer story, in that the movie ends with her smiling.
Yeah.
Like there's a comfort in, she's out of the misery of, she's transcended to something else.
Yeah.
But now it almost feels like that's a setup for what's going to happen on the new series.
Yeah.
It doesn't, like, it really felt like a conclusion to me. Like it finally gave Laura Palmer as a character some peace at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how they're going to expand on that with the new show.
I'll be interested in that.
So for the longest time, this movie was the end of Twin Peaks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people hated it because it wasn't like the show. But it's a very good movie just in its own right.
Absolutely, I agree.
And for years, I was fascinated by the deleted material.
Which there were always stories about.
I would, for a while, I kind of got tired of it because I was like, we're never going to see this. But I would read these stories about like, oh, the footage there's legal entanglements. It's owned by some French company or something. And I really thought we were never going to see it at a certain point.
Yeah.
And then a couple years ago, I guess they worked that out.
Yeah, Paramount got the rights to everything.
90 minutes of deleted material, which was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
After years and years of, one, not thinking that was ever going to come out, and just kind of assuming Twin Peaks was done for. So to see all this stuff, and a lot of it I can understand why it was cut.
Sure.
Because it really does make the movie focus more on Laura and her story by deleting it. Some of it, I think, would have helped,
Yes.
like the full David Bowie scene.
That for sure. More of the earlier family stuff with the Palmers would have been nice. I mean, that whole, and again, bringing back some of the David Lynch humor.
I want a 2x4. I ordered a 2x4.
You see, Mr. Mibbler, the wood comes in over here and it goes out over there. Now, when it's over here, it's exactly 2x4. But when it comes out over there, it's exactly 1 9/16 by 3 9/16. It's that way all over our land.
You admitted that.
Well, let's talk about the Pete scene, because I love that scene as an isolated scene. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, just one day at the mill, Pete's having an argument with the old banker guy from the last episode, the guy that gets blown up in the explosion.
Yes. I wanted a 2x4.
And Pete's trying to explain to him that 2x4 doesn't actually mean anything, and there's got to be an industry standard. Got to be a standard in the cutting industry.
It's a very David Lynch scene, and it's nice to see Jack Nance too, since he's not in the movie anywhere else.
And yeah, bits and pieces like that, where like there's a little bit of character stuff with Big Ed and Norma and Nadine, a little bit with Shelley and Leo. So like stuff that's basically just kind of like bits and pieces adding on to the characters, you know, from the show, and you get to see a little more of them.
Right.
And it definitely changes the tone of the movie more towards what the TV show is.
Which I think, because so much of the movie is so like serious and intense, I think having those little bits here and there would be awkward. It wouldn't have that kind of like smooth transition of tones that the show has, where everything's balanced pretty well. 90% of the movie is a terrifying nightmare.
Yeah.
So having these tiny little bits with like, I wanted a 2x4, I think would have been awkward.
Yeah, it just, it kind of, it's just that absurdity, and just whether, you know, David Lynch is all about absurd, whether, you know, whether it's dark or light, it still isn't, you know, you can step back from most scenes in anywhere in that movie and you're like, isn't this kind of fucking nuts?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's in different tones.
Well, then we get to the end.
Until that, yeah.
Because there's the end of the series, which is the most frustrating and amazing thing ever.
How's Annie? How's Annie? How's Annie?
Good Coop's trapped in the Black Lodge.
Yes, and that's how the series ends. You're like, what the fuck?
Yep.
The first time I saw it, I was flipping out. I was like, that's it? What?
Directed by David Lynch. Oh, fuck!
So then, when you're watching the deleted scenes from this movie, and we elaborate more on what happens after that.
You're going right back to bed.
But I haven't brushed my teeth yet.
But it's nothing.
No, it's just
to the point where it's like, why did you even film this?
Yeah.
You're not elaborated on it in any way.
I almost feel like that's where they shot it like on the set and just like, well, I can use that footage, because it cuts right in from where he's, you know, where he's hit him, you know, he's hit his head on the mirror and it's bleeding, and then, you know, Hank breaks the door down, and he and Dr. Hayward get him, you know, and just like give him a sedative, and just like, I fell.
I thought they were going to do something, elaborate on it, but
no. But they do at that point bring Annie back.
Yes.
They cut to Annie in the hospital, and Annie's saying the same thing that she was saying in Laura's dream.
Yeah.
But she has the ring on, and the nurse ganks the ring. It's like, there's something happened there. It just didn't have anything to do with Cooper. There's one shot that got cut out where Laura is walking up the stairs, and we get the idea throughout that the ceiling fan in the hallway is kind of a trigger.
Well, the spirits, they kind of travel through electricity, we discover. So.
Yeah. And so there's a point where Laura's halfway up the stairs, the light starts strobing, and they cut, like, it's a really tight close-up of Cheryl Lee, and her face just like into this crazy rictus, like super slow motion, and the sound is just like. But it's interesting that it differs from, like, it's not like a creepy atmosphere thing.
No,
it's more direct than that.
Yeah,
it's just it's not a shock, but it's just, here it is, way too long in your face.
Yeah, well,
like,
and
it's still very
direct. Like the close-up is so extreme, like it takes you out of your comfort zone, and that's an interesting thing to point out with the movie as opposed to like the way the TV show is shot, which is the TV show is shot relatively traditionally for a TV show, but the movie is lots of close-ups, lots of close-ups of Laura Palmer's face,
inside people's throats.
Inside, yeah, exactly. We're literally entering people's bodies.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely more. It makes the movie feel way more intimate than the TV show does. In addition to claustrophobic, yeah. In addition to the story itself being more intimate.
Yeah.
But I don't want you to be like me.
Well, we're not going to talk too much about expectations or anticipation for the new show.
I've been avoiding it, like trying not to find out anything about it.
I have a feeling the show is going to upset people. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be because it's David Lynch, so it's hard to say. But were I to guess, it'll probably be closer in like tone and style to Fire Walk With Me than the original series.
I would think so, although Mark Frost is again involved.
Yeah, there'll still be a little bit more narrative through line going through it, but I don't think it's going to be all hot coffee and cherry pie.
No, no, I don't think so. And it's interesting to think about how this is basically bringing David Lynch back to filmmaking as well. Like he's been for a few years now. He's just saying like he's done with films, just going to do.
Just making his weird music and painting and whatever he wants.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this new show kind of special is that like because lots of things are getting revived now with like Fuller House and whatever else, but this is something that is only coming back because it's something that David Lynch really has an interest in doing.
Yeah.
And it's just, even if it wasn't Twin Peaks, it's 18 hours of new directed David Lynch material.
Yeah.
Which is like an embarrassment of riches.
Exactly.
So I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. I love Twin Peaks. I love David Lynch.
Yeah.
And
it's just more of what we love.
If it's anything like the movie, it'll also subvert a lot of expectations.
Yes.
Because Fire Walk With Me is very, very different from the original series in a lot of ways. Tonally, stylistically, and I have a feeling the new show is going to be its own thing as well. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much more he'll be able to shoot it like he does his last few films, because obviously he'll be working with digital still, because he's all about that digital stuff.
As long as it's not like a consumer grade SD camera like Inland Empire.
I would hope not by this point, but I wouldn't doubt that we'll see echoes of some of the Inland Empire stuff, because it's echoing back from Fire Walk With Me, some of the close-ups and things like that.
Well, and just the themes, the whole like sort of duology of a person.
Yeah.
Which that's sort of Twin Peaks on. That's kind of every David Lynch movie.
Yeah, he really got into that whole idea, didn't he?
Well, and when you get to like Lost Highway or even Mulholland Drive, it's where the person is literally two people. I mean, in Lost Highway, it's Bill Pullman, and then he becomes Balthazar Getty. He's a completely different person. And I think what makes Fire Walk With Me different is that it's just sort of you have Bob, but with Laura Palmer, it's just two kind of halves of the same person. There's the light side and the dark side, and she's struggling with that. So it's more of an internal kind of emotional struggle as opposed to literally being two people.
In Fire Walk With Me, we're definitely looking at the struggle of this person. She's trying to figure out who she's meant to be in the first place and which one's right or wrong, or which one she's destined to be.
Right, and I guess to wrap it up, that's why I love the movie so much, is that all the weird stuff set aside, when you get to the heart of it, it's this really emotional and tough story of just watching this girl kind of struggling with these demons.
Yeah, it's not an easy watch by any means, but it's wonderfully written. The acting is spectacular. For the most part, it stands on its own, and it's definitely a piece that's unique both in Twin Peaks continuity and David Lynch, even though it's got some echoes. There's nothing that's really quite like Fire Walk With Me.